Okay, so the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. On the evening of April 14th, 1865, on the evening of April 14th, 1865, President and Mrs. Lincoln decided to attend a theater performance at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. On the evening of April 14th, 1865, President and Mrs. Lincoln decided they would attend a theater performance at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The name of that performance was Our American Cousin. That was the name of the play that was going to be performed on the evening of April 14th, 1865. Now, the President and the First Lady actually invited 14 guests to join them that evening, including General Ulysses S. Grant and his wife. Okay? So they invited 14 guests to come with them, including General Ulysses S. Grant and his wife. So the Lincolns weren't planning on going by themselves. They were inviting guests. Well, General Grant canceled on the President because he and his wife were planning on spending some time with their children. It just didn't work out. Okay? So General Grant and his wife declined the invitation by President Lincoln because they already had plans to spend time with their children. Matter of fact, only 2 people of the 14 that the Lincolns invited kept their invitation and attended. So of the 14 people that were invited, including General Grant and his wife, only 2 accepted the invitations. And they were Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. So the only 2 people that kept their invitations of the 14 to attend the play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater with President and Mrs. Lincoln were Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. Now let's talk about early that morning of April 14th, 1865. About 10:30 that morning, John Wilkes Booth went to Ford's Theater. 10:30 that morning, several hours before the play, John Wilkes Booth went to Ford's Theater. Why did he go to Ford's Theater? Anybody know the story? Why he went there? He went there to check his mail, which was delivered daily to the theater, which tells you that he is what? A frequent actor during these performances. So he went there at 10:30 a.m. to check his mail because his mail was delivered to Ford's Theater every single day, which tells you that he was a frequent actor during those play performances at Ford's. Well, during the time he was checking his mail when he was at Ford's Theater, John Wilkes Booth ran into the manager of Ford's Theater, Henry Clay Ford. And guess what Henry Clay Ford told Booth? Macklin? Very good, that President Lincoln and his wife were planning to attend that evening. So at Ford's Theater, Booth runs into the theater manager, Henry Clay Ford, and Ford informs Booth that President Lincoln would be attending the play with his wife later that evening. Now you think about this. Because Booth was a well-known actor at the theater, is this going to be the perfect opportunity for him to get close enough to the president to assassinate him? He'll never have a better chance. Is anybody going to question that he's there? No. So Booth knows, because he's a very popular actor of the day, he's recognized by many in the acting profession, his question as far as his appearance at Ford's Theater that evening would lead to a perfect opportunity for him to assassinate the president. Now, I don't know how many of you know this or not, Booth didn't just plan on one assassination that night, he planned on 3. And the other 2 targets were going to be Secretary of State William Seward, who we talked about before. Secretary of State William Seward. And who do you think the other target might be? Don't think too hard on this. Who might be the other target?
His wife?
No, good guess. What? No, because he's not going to be there. But who's the next in command? Vice President Andrew Johnson is going to be the other target. So Booth doesn't have plans on just assassinating one person that evening. He's got plans to assassinate 3. Can he be in 3 places at one time? No, so it tells you that his co-conspirators are going to be involved. So both Secretary of State William Seward and Vice President Andrew Johnson would also be targeted for assassination that night. And according to Booth's plan, all 3 political assassinations would be at the same time. Same time. Now, you have to remember that the Secret Service wasn't like the Secret Service was today at all. So they did have one person that was guarding Lincoln's box seat in Ford's Theater. And it was a police officer by the name of John Parker. It would be John Parker's responsibility to guard the presidential box that night. Well, at approximately 8:30 p.m., the night of April 14th, 1865, the presidential party arrived at Ford's Theater. Who's the presidential party? President, First Lady, Major Rathbone, and his fiancée. That would be the presidential party. That's who's going with the president. If all 14 people would have accepted invitations, the presidential party would have been all of those people. Okay? So at 8:30 p.m., the presidential party arrives at Ford's Theater. At 9:30 p.m., John Wilkes Booth arrives at the theater with 2 things: a single-shot Derringer pistol and a hunting knife. So at 9:30 p.m., John Wilkes Booth arrives at Ford's Theater. In his possession, a single-shot Derringer. You know what a Derringer is? Very small pistol. Very small pistol. And he also had a hunting knife with him. Who was the man that was the co-conspirator, that was the carpenter and stagehand at Ford's Theater? Anybody remember that? Want to look him up? Who was that guy? Who was the guy that was the... Go ahead. Yep. When Booth arrived at Ford's Theater, he asked Edmund Spangler, who was the carpenter and stagehand, to hold his horse for him while he went in. Okay? So when Booth arrives at Ford's Theater, he asked stagehand and carpenter Edmund Spangler to hold his horse. Well, Spangler was on duty that night. When Booth gave him his horse to hold, how is he supposed to do his job? So what Spangler does is he hands Booth's horse to a young man by the name of Joseph Burroughs, and he asks him to hold the horse in the alley. So Booth gives his horse to Spangler, and because Spangler is supposed to be working that night, he hands Booth's horse, the reins of Booth's horse, over to a young man by the name of Joseph Burroughs. He was just simply a young peanut vendor, someone that sold peanuts to people that were attending the play outside the play. So he was out there doing his thing, and he ended up being the guy holding, young guy holding Booth's horse. Well, when Booth handed the reins of his horse to Spangler, he went to a nearby saloon to get a drink before he went into the theater. And you know what made historians think that he was a little nervous? Instead of ordering his usual brandy, which he liked to drink, he ordered what? Instead, a little stronger. Whiskey. He ordered whiskey. So Booth left Spangler after handing him his horse. He headed to a nearby saloon for a drink, and he ordered a whiskey instead of his usual brandy, which tells you that he might have been a little bit unnerved on what he was about to do. Okay? Well, Booth had his drink, and he leaves the saloon, and he arrives and goes into Ford's Theater at approximately 10:07 p.m. that night. So he leaves the saloon, has his drink of whiskey, calm his nerves, what historians think, and then enters Ford's Theater at 10:07. Well, John Parker, the man that was assigned to guard Lincoln that night, got a little bit bored, I guess, for lack of a better thought process, left his post and went and found a better seat so he could more comfortably watch the play performance. So John Parker got kind of thinking this is maybe not that big of a deal. He abandons his post in guarding the president, and he goes and finds a seat so he can better watch the play. Now, do you understand? I assume you know some of this history. Where is Booth seated? Is he seated on the floor in the audience? So the play's being performed. I'm the actor. You're the people sitting in the chairs. Lincoln was up in the presidential booth off to the left of the stage with his wife, Major Rathbone, and his fiancée. They were up so if you were the actor, you'd be looking up there. Ford's Theater, and you will be there in about a year or so, sets out in here and has an upper balcony as well. It's a very pretty theater. But anyway, they had a presidential booth up in that area. Okay? And that's where the presidential party was. Well, after Booth entered the theater, he walked up the staircase towards that presidential box. And he entered a room just outside of where the president was sitting. In other words, if Matty is the president, he walked into a room and there was another door, say where Pete is. So I walk through the door, I'm in a little room, there's another door for me to get to the president. Okay? So, as he enters the theater, Booth walks up the staircase towards the presidential box and he enters a room that's just outside where the president is sitting. When he walked in that original door, because there's a door where Morgan is and a door right here, when he walked through the door where Morgan was, the first door, he barricaded it shut with a wood bar. In other words, he didn't want anybody coming in on him. So he comes in the door of this little room that leads into the presidential box, and he barricades that door after he comes through with a wood bar. Well, the play is performing, and at approximately 10:15 p.m., the play Our American Cousin reaches Act 3, Scene 2. So at 10:15, as the play is being performed, the play Our American Cousin reaches Act 3, Scene 2. And at that point in the performance, an actor by the name of Harry Hawk performed the funniest line in the play that evening. Okay, so at Act 3, Scene 2, approximately 10:15 p.m., actor Harry Hawk, who was performing in the play, performed the funniest line in the play that evening. Booth had this planned to the T. He knew the play, and he knew the actor's line would result in what? Lots of loud laughter from the approximate 1,700 people in attendance. Booth had this all planned out. He knew when Harry Hawk made this funny line in the play that 1,700 people were going to laugh, causing a loud roar or noise. Now, what that loud laughter would give is Booth the opportunity to open this door that led into the presidential booth without anybody really hearing him. Because if the play's very quiet, it's going to be difficult, right? But if everybody's laughing, it's easy to get in there. At the time of that funniest line and the laughter from 1,700 spectators, Booth opened the door to the presidential box and fired that .44 caliber single-shot Derringer into the back of President Lincoln's head. .44 caliber is a good-sized mini ball. So Booth opens the door right as the laughter erupts to the presidential box, aims and fires his .44 caliber single-shot Derringer into the back of Lincoln's head. And he was, if you look at Matty, the pistol was this far away. I mean, a foot away. He wasn't, as soon as he walked to the door, the president's head was right there. So the pistol was no more than a foot away from his head. Well, the bullet ends up hitting Lincoln in the back of the head and lodges behind his right eye. And he slumps over and loses consciousness immediately. So the bullet comes through the back of his head, and basically behind his right eye is where it stops. And the president slumps over and loses consciousness immediately. What do you think the next reaction was by anyone in the presidential party? Well, that, and what do you think Major Rathbone did when he saw that the president had been shot? He grabbed Booth. He was that close. And Booth dropped his Derringer on the floor of the presidential box. So as soon as the shot was fired, Major Rathbone figured out what was going on, and he grabbed John Wilkes Booth. And when he grabbed Booth, the Derringer dropped from his hand onto the floor of the presidential box. What do you think Booth did then? Pulled out that knife and he slashed Major Rathbone's left arm between his shoulder and his elbow. So he slashed it right in here. So he took out that hunting knife and slashed Major Rathbone's arm. What does Booth do next? Because he barricaded the door that he came in, his only exit is to jump from the presidential box onto the stage. And that's what he attempts to do. So he shoots Lincoln, slashes Rathbone, and knows his only escape is over the balcony of the presidential box onto the stage. However, as he begins to jump from the presidential box, Major Rathbone, who's bleeding from his wound, grabs at Booth's coat to try to prevent him from escaping. So Booth begins to jump down from the presidential box to the stage, and Major Rathbone, bleeding profusely from his wound, grabs at Booth's coat to try to get him from jumping off. Well, when Major Rathbone grabs at him, Booth catches his spur on the American flag that was draped over the presidential box. Catches his spur on it. So as Major Rathbone attempts to grab Booth, Booth jumps and catches his spur on the American flag that was draped over the presidential box. Because of that, he falls awkwardly 12 feet onto the stage and breaks his ankle. Okay, because of the attempt by Rathbone and the fact that he got his spur caught on the American flag, he falls to 12 feet from the presidential box down to the stage awkwardly and breaks his ankle. Even though he's got a broken ankle, Booth, the actor that he is, turns and faces that crowd of 1,700 and shouts, "Sic semper tyrannis." Shouts that as loud as he can at the audience as he's standing on the stage after jumping out of the presidential box. He yells, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is a Latin phrase meaning, "thus always to tyrants." Thus always to tyrants. So, I mean, this guy was an actor all the way. He shoots the president, slashes Major Rathbone, jumps off the presidential box, catches his spur, breaks his ankle, stands and faces the crowd of 1,700 people, stunned, at Ford's Theater and yells, "Sic semper tyrannis," which was a Latin phrase meaning, "thus always to tyrants." Dragging his broken leg, Booth makes his escape through the back door of the stage, mounts his horse, which was being held by that young man, and rides off into the night. So again, Booth, despite his broken leg, made his escape through the back door of the stage, painfully mounted his horse, and rode off into the night. Meanwhile, Lincoln was being cared for by Dr. Charles Leal, who happened to be in the crowd that night. So Dr. Charles Leal is trying to care for the president. And what Leal did is he laid the president on the floor next to the rocking chair he was sitting in when shot and began artificial resuscitation on the president. Okay? So Charles Leal comes up to the presidential box, lays the president on the floor. He was slumped in his rocking chair, lays him on the floor, and begins to try to resuscitate him. Well, Leal couldn't find any wound until finally he rubbed his fingers through Lincoln's hair and found the gap in the skull where the bullet had entered. So it wasn't a big bleeder, if you know what I mean. He couldn't see a lot of blood at all. That bullet went through, it never exited, did it? That's what makes the gore and the blood, is when a bullet exits. Okay, it didn't exit, got stuck behind his right eye. He couldn't figure out what was wrong with him so much until he rubbed his hand behind his head and found this gaping hole in the back of his head where the bullet went in. 3 more doctors joined Leal and cared for the president, but every one of them knew his wound was mortal. Every one of them. Where would be the natural progression to take the president from Ford's Theater?